Why should I move to the next slide?
Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today for another e-seminar on Translational Biomedical Engineering. This is our 76th seminar that we started since the beginning of the pandemic in June. So today we have Professor Farshid Alambeigi from University of Texas at Austin that he's going to talk about the surgery and medical robotics and the technology that he has been working on since his graduate school, and now he has his own lab in University of Texas at Austin. So our next speaker is Jenny Chen. Next week is she's a startup advisor, investor, and a medical doctor. She's interested in advising startup companies and on 3D biofabrication and 3D bioprinting. So for getting the most updated information, you can always follow us on LinkedIn and also our Twitter handle, TransLBME. So by that, it's my great pleasure to introduce Professor Alambeigi. Professor Alambeigi is an assistant professor at and the director of the Advanced Robotic Technologies for Surgery Arts Lab at Walker Department of Mechanical Engineering in the University of Texas at Austin since August 2019. He is also a core faculty member in the Texas Robotics Institute. His research aims to partner dexterous and flexible robots with clinicians to promote semi-autonomous and intuitive, minimally invasive surgical interventions. To this end, his lab works toward developing high dexterity robots and flexible instruments with integrated fiber-optic sensor as well as smart control algorithms. Professor Alambeigi received his PhD from the Mechanical Engineering Department at Johns Hopkins University in May 2019. He also received his Master of Engineering degree in robotics from Johns Hopkins University in 2017. Before joining the Johns Hopkins University in 2014, he received a master's degree in mechanical engineering from Sharif University of Technology, where in collaboration with Tehran University of Medical Sciences, he worked on the design, development, and control of the SINA telesurgical system. Dr. Alambeigi holds several licensed patents for biomedical devices, and his research has been featured in the Wall Street Journal and the other media. In summer 2018, he was honored as one of the 2019 Siebel Scholar in the bioengineering field. This prestigious and competitive scholarship is awarded annually for academic excellence and demonstrated leadership to over 90 top students from the world's leading graduate schools. In 2020, Professor Alambeigi received the prestigious NIH R21 Trailblazer award to develop novel flexible implants and robots for minimally invasive spinal fixation surgery. It's our great pleasure to have him with us today as a speaker. I invite him to share his screen, and the mic is yours. Please.
Hello, everyone. First of all, thanks, Human and Mohsen, for inviting me and a nice introduction. So, do you see my screen? Then I can actually share my slides.
Yes.
Start my talk. Okay, perfect. Hello, everyone. So today I'm going to talk about surgery engineering and particularly surgery engineering using intelligent and flexible robotic systems. I'm an assistant professor, as Human mentioned, in UT Austin, and then basically a little bit, I wanted to in this slide basically introduce myself and my academic background. I started my job in 2019, as I mentioned, in UT Austin in Walker Department of Mechanical Engineering. I'm also a core faculty member in Texas Robotics, And I also have an basically appointment with Center of Additive Manufacturing and Design Innovation in Department of Mechanical Engineering in UT
Farshid,
Austin.
I don't know if Human has the same issue, but I can see the full screen. So I just see your slides and I don't see them moving. I don't know if that's the case with Human as well, but on my end, I can see.
Yes, I see only the first slide.
Oh, do you see only the first slide? Interesting. Let me share it again. So for some reason, hold on, please. Let me share.
I don't know if that's the case for Human and others as well in the audience, but for me, that's what I see.
Do you see my slide right now? I mean,
I see your slides, but it's not in a presentation.
Okay.
Mode.
How about now? Do you see the slides moving?
No, I don't.
Oh,
it's not on the
Human,
presentation.
do you see them?
No, it's not on the presentation mode.
Because seems that I'm in the presentation mode, but seems that you don't see it for some reason. All right.
Maybe share
so
the whole.
You're using two screens probably.
That's not connected actually. So the other screen is not connected. That's the thing.
Share the whole screen, not the application, not the PowerPoint.
Let me check again. Windows. Share. Interesting.
So maybe if you can go to the presentation mode and then share your screen and then switch between them, then it would be good. Otherwise, I mean, we can.
How about now? Do you see anything?
No, I think it's trying to share it on another screen. We can go with the. Yeah.
Let me see. Give me a second. Maybe I can.
We checked before it was working.
Yeah. Anyhow.
That's. I mean.
See. This presenter view. How about now? Do you see anything? Any slides?
No, not yet. Not
you
yet.
need to share your screen.
Oh, okay. Like that. Let me see this time. So, window. Okay. Maybe
so if you share,
I guess I see. What was the issue? Hold on, please. Let me try it this time. Might work. Not sure. Let's see. How about now? It's the same, or?
That's the same, pretty much.
Okay.
I think.
Let me go.
Maybe if you can, through your slides, like we can zoom in. Probably go to exactly.
Okay.
And then maybe zoom in, go
That's
to 100%.
Okay, so let's see what we can do.
Oh, we had. I mean.
Or maybe as. Okay, or maybe as Marek mentioned, maybe you can share your screen. Okay.
So it's just you have to navigate through the slides a little bit. It's a little bit difficult for you, but we can.
Let me see. Fine. Okay. So do you see it now, right? For some reason.
Yeah, we can see
fix it later.
We can see it moving. Yeah.
Okay, that's not perfect, but better than nothing. Thank you, guys. Yeah.
Thank you, Farshid.
Sure. Yeah. So. I mean, let's go to the introduction slide. Unfortunately, we don't see the animations, but I mean, please accept it from me. So, all right, my background. So I started again, like 2019 in UT Austin. I have affiliations with Texas Robotics, with Central Additive Manufacturing. I'm the director of Advanced Robotic Technologies for Surgery or Arts Lab. Before joining UT, I did my PhD in 2019 in Johns Hopkins, and then got another master's degree in robotics back in 2017, again in Johns Hopkins University. Before joining Johns Hopkins, I did my master's in Sharif University of Technology, got my degree in 2012, and then my undergrad was in Khaja Nasiruddin Tusi University of Technology. So Before, actually, I had this slide because I think it was a very big milestone for my research. So before joining Johns Hopkins and starting my PhD, I did my master's in basically Sharif University. My PhD my master's dissertation by the time was on control of the system that you see here, SINA telesurgical system. So that was basically the time that we started with like a bunch of my friends, and then obviously our advisor, Dr. Fahman, to develop this basically telesurgical system back in Iran from scratch. So as you see, this picture was back in 2000, I guess, 13 or 14 before I come to the US. And you see there was basically, this is just a bunch of motors and then links and so on and so forth. But people, a few of you might have heard about this system. No, actually, this is commercialized and fully functional. They have done different animal studies in Iran, and I heard actually they are selling it. The good news is that even they are selling it to some countries, and it's very, very functional. So my role by the time was as a mechatronics engineer, try to make the robot working, commanding the basically motors, and then working with the sensors, and basically try to connect the leader side and follower side, or surgeon side console, or the patient side console using control algorithms. So what was nice, actually, I had this slide because I wanted to mention who actually was involved and what they are doing right now, because I mean, to me, it's very interesting. So Dr. Alamdar was one of the main people who designed and fabricated these robots, the elements of these robots. He's a postdoc in Johns Hopkins right now. Dr. Jamshid Ifar, he's actually a postdoc in University of Waterloo in Canada. Borna, my friend, he's also working in MapleSoft in Canada. Dr. Hadavand, he's also working, he changed his field. He's working in a company. Dr. Torabi, he has his own company. He's a CTO of a very nice, actually, additive manufacturing company, 3DO in California in the United States. Dr. Kadam, like me, he decided to go to academia. He's a faculty in UK and University of Edinburgh. He's also working in medical robotics field. So a little bit about Texas Robotics. I want to advertise actually my university and my institute. So Texas Robotics actually before I joined in 2017, as far as I know, different departments in the UT started to talk about basically making a new institute. Now we call it Texas Robotics. And basically, instead of having different departments having their own robotics research, trying to make Texas Robotics and work together and make this partnership. So now Texas Robotics includes aerospace engineering, computer science department, electrical and computer engineering department, and mechanical engineering department. All of these 4 departments are top 10 ranked, actually, universities across the world. So Texas Robotics, as of now, we have 16 core faculties, 40 affiliated faculties, adjunct faculties, and more than 150 students and postdocs and researchers. We have 2 main direction of research in Texas Robotics. One of them is general purpose autonomy, and the other one is human-robot interaction. For people who are familiar with robotics, general purpose autonomy examples includes like mobile robots, like autonomous cars, and this type of research. And basically, if you have a robot that want to interact in uncertain environments, real-world environments, how these robots can autonomously and without a direct control of an operator interact with the environment. Human-robot interaction, on the other hand, are robots, including medical robots, surgical robots, even like industrial robots, directly interacting with a human to accomplish a job. For instance, we can have a rehabilitation robot that directly interacts with a patient to get some rehabilitation, let's say exercises, or a surgical robot that has a basically direct interaction with a surgeon So, all right, that's the bad part. Let me see, I can go. Okay. So in Texas Robotics, we have different sorts of robots, as I mentioned. You can see a bunch of them here. We have from like a Spot Mini robot that you have seen from Boston Dynamics, like a lot of videos of that are in the YouTube, and then you can Google and find it, up to custom designs robots. This is a rehab robot, exoskeleton for upper body rehabilitation. And also we have biped robots. We have like hands, basically exoskeleton hand robot. All of them actually developed and fabricated in UT Austin by the faculties, to social robots and also mobile robots, basically with some robotic manipulators attached to it. But what I do actually in my lab as the arts lab, in our lab, our main goal is to basically what we call it surgeoneering, which is, in other words, is the engineering of the surgery. Our goal is to work with the clinicians, especially in UT Dell Medical School, try to develop robots, technologies, and sensors to help them to perform their job in a better way in terms of basically better outcome for patients, and in terms of their clinicians, make them like basically the work that they do in an easier way. So I have slides. I have basically today, my goal is to show you some examples of the technologies from the robots, from the implants, and from the sensors, how we are trying to develop new technologies, new software, and new control algorithms to make their basically the surgeon's job easier once they are working in an operating room, with the goal of improving the basically surgical outcome. So I talked about surgeoneering very briefly, but how we can define it. So in any surgical application, I'm not just talking about robotic surgery in general. So when we have basically a surgical technology that we are developing for a clinician, typically we have three elements in this basically loop that we can consider. One of them is the physicians. I mean, independent of the type of surgery, like it can be any like laparoscopic surgery or like basically heart surgery or anything, physicians are the key aspects of this basically loop that you see here. The other part is the basically technology. Again, independent of the type of the technology, which can be a robot, which can be a sensor, which can be like an imaging technology or like bioprinting or anything, the other key concepts or element in this loop is technology, and the other basically component is information. What are information is basically whatever that we can obtain from the physician or from the technology, including the imaging, basically data we can measure from the sensors or obtain from the robots, up to what physicians can tell us, including basically like technologies that we can measure like skills of a surgeons or clinicians during performing a surgery by following their hands or movements, or even understanding how a novice surgeon or expert surgeon can perform a technology. So this information, as you see, these arrows are two-sided, meaning that either of these information and technologies, both of them are affecting each other, and together this complete loop forming surgeoneering. In other words, surgeoneering by this definition tries to bridge the gap between the surgeons, engineers, and then information to develop technologies to help surgeons and then achieve the goals that I mentioned in my previous slide, which is improving the quality of the surgery and then better outcome in terms of the patient safety and quality of treatment. So I want to also highlight, unfortunately, most of the engineering basically that has been done, from the software to the hardware development to developing technologies for controlling robots, so far, most of the time, physicians and then engineers, basically, which we we are in that part, are not working together through the development of the technology. Most of the time what happens, physicians comes and says, okay, I need this device. I need to basically, for me to develop this technology, it can be a device, it can be a software or anything that can resolve this issue for my work. And then most of the time, 99% of the time, then the physicians, they do not work along with the engineers through this process. And what happens is, unfortunately, engineers develop something in the end that might not be very helpful for the physicians, because what's happening is that the knowledge, the clinical knowledge, the physician's knowledge is not basically coming through the process of the design. And most of the time, unfortunately, once we want to translate that technology, we will see that actually is not very useful, and we cannot basically find a good market for that. So with the definition of surgery engineering, we are trying to say both engineers and surgeons from the very beginning of the design should work together toward development of a technology that we can translate it to the market. So the outline of my talk. So here is basically I want to talk about current state of the surgical technologies, and then I want to say what's the meaning of the dexterity, minimally invasive like surgeries, and then talk a little bit about the hot topic of autonomy. You have heard about autonomous cars, right? So what we are thinking in the robotic surgery field is that bringing autonomy to help surgeons also to perform basically some of their interventions. And then in the end, I want to just talk about the future directions and what's happening next. So in the beginning, I want to start with very nice actually plot that I found it from this paper. It's kind of old, but still it works, because what it shows is that if you look at the x-axis, it's just the milestones in terms of the year which any technology, most of the surgical related technology has been developed. So starting from the open surgery to minimally invasive surgery, which was a very big milestone for surgical technology. So if you check here, unfortunately, again, I don't have the animations, but what I can show on top, I'm showing here the typical open surgery basically application, in which a surgeon cuts the patients open. Typically, we have a large incision, and surgeon has a direct access and view to the target anatomy using the tools to perform a surgery. So then if you see at this basically emoji, you will see that from the clinician side, he's very happy because accessing to the target and then seeing the target anatomy is very easy. But from the patient perspective, he's not happy because he or she is going to deal with a very large incision, and large incision means that larger time or longer time for improvement and getting better, and then it needs more hospitalization for the patient. On the other hand, in 1980, with the concept of minimally invasive surgery, instead of having large incision, this concept says, instead of having a big incision, let's just have some smart keyholes, 5 to 8 millimeter, use rigid instruments, pass them through that hole. One of them is the camera, which acting as an eye of the surgeon to see the target anatomy or organ, and the other one typically are two instruments that are held and controlled by the basically surgeon. And in this type of basically surgery, typically surgeons need another clinician to control the direction of this laparoscope. So if you compare this two, and if you look at this actually makes the life of the surgeon much harder because of many issues. You don't have that nice direct line of sight that you see here. And also the movement are mirrored in laparoscopic motion. Basically, if surgeon moves to the left, the endoscope or the instrument moves to the right, and vice versa. And this is not a good thing. It has created a lot of issues for basically surgeons. On the other hand, patient is happy because there is no longer this large incision, and then the hospitalization by far would be less. So to mitigate this issue and make basically both patient and surgeons happy, in 1990, Intuitive Surgical Company introduced this nice robot which they call the Da Vinci surgical robot. Probably most of you have heard about this evolutionary and very nice surgical robot. By the time actually this was, still, this is the only working surgical robotic system that in 2018, as the Intuitive Surgical has reported, they have done more than 1 million surgeries per year using this unit. You see here with this system, so surgeons sit behind a very nice console, which they call it surgeon console, controlling two robotic manipulators in a teleoperation or remote operation that controls indeed another robot, set of robots. You see here 1, 2, 3, 4 arms that we call this patient side manipulators. What it does actually, that laparoscopic information that I told you, indeed this system does minimally invasive laparoscopic surgery, which basically in the definition, the tools are going through very small incisions through the body with the camera, and the surgeon can control very nicely and in a very precisely, like what you see in this view, do suturing, do manipulation as their hands are inside the body. So this system has tools, as you see here, these instruments mimicking the degrees of freedom of the human hand. In this case, basically, they have 7 degrees of freedom, completely simulating all the degrees of the freedom of the hand, and then together with the grip motion. And the whole idea was that can we bridge that gap from the open surgery and minimally invasive surgery and make something that makes surgeons and basically patients, both of them, happy while improving the outcome for the surgery. So this was a very big milestone. And literally after this field of surgical robotics actually had a huge improvement. But I want to talk today about 2 more milestones that is still ongoing in our field, in the field of robotic surgery. One of them is actually, we call it a flexible access surgery or transluminal surgery. So for robotic surgery, basically I said they are some sort of a spin-off of minimally invasive surgery in which we still need some incision to go through the body and perform some surgery. But the other concepts of transluminal surgery or natural orifice transluminal surgery tries to go through the natural orifices of the body rather than even making an incision. Basically, having robots or instruments that, for instance, go through the mouth and go through the organs of the interest, and then surgeons after that can do some, basically perform some like basically interventions inside the body. But in order to have such capability or enable such capability, not anymore we can use instruments that are rigid. So what I forgot to tell with respect to the Da Vinci robot is that almost most of the tools used in this system or typical instruments in the laparoscopic surgery, most of them are rigid. Means that they cannot deform or they are not dexterous, which bring a lot of issues in terms of their control and accessibility. To address that, so in our field in robotic surgery, we develop basically continuum manipulators and recently also basically soft robots to improve this dexterity and then mitigate the issues of accessibility that I mentioned. So if you see these pictures with continuum manipulators, we don't have a typical rigid links and joints, and the robots can bend. You can imagine you can go through the body and it can follow the curvatures, natural curvatures of the anatomy, and then you can control that to achieve basically to the target anatomy without creating some safety issues for the patient. So I talked about continuum manipulators, but for the people who are not familiar, in general, we say continuum manipulators have infinite degree of freedom. What's the meaning of that? Typically, you have seen, most of you probably, this type of robot, industrial robots. These are serial link robots that all of their joints and links are made of rigid, basically components. By rigid means that they are not deforming. And they have limited degrees of freedom. Then we have basically hyper-redundant snake-like robot, as you see here. They call it snake-like robots. Like by the time in 1890, they were very actually popular, and then they were very actually hot topic in the research. If you see here, we call it hyper-redundant because there are a lot of motors and links in the body of these robots, and indeed, like the snake robots or a snake, they can actually bend and deform. But similar to the industrial robots, they are made of rigid links and rigid basically joints. On the other hand, we have continuum robots and soft robots. They are not using any rigid components as of these two cases, and they can bend and you can control them. But they have their own issues that I'm going to talk about today, hopefully. So with flexible access surgery, as I mentioned, the idea is that we want to make basically robots that can go through the very small incision, like or no incision, and use the deformability or flexibility of continuum robots or soft robots in order to bend and then achieve or reach to the targets that a surgeon is interested. So this one, for instance, is a single port Da Vinci robot, which is, I guess, got its FDA approval and it's going to get to the market. You see, there was one incision, one big actually hole, and then you will see one camera and 3 arms can get in, and the surgeon can control either of these tools. And you see, as opposed to the previous version, these tools can deform and bend to increase the accessibility and deformability. And this is another one from the basically Oris company that Johnson & Johnson actually acquired them like 2-3 years ago. This is a catheter robot for basically performing bronchoscopy in the lung. Before actually this robot or catheter robot, surgeons couldn't reach to some area of the lung to do the biopsy or even do some sort of like intervention. But with this technology, as you see, the surgeon can control this catheter using a joystick, basically game joystick, to control the catheter and reach to the target anatomy they are interested and perform some delicate task, biopsy, and then interventions. But what's happening here, if you just check all the continuum manipulators and flexible robots and flexible access surgery tools, most of them have been developed for soft tissue related surgeries. As far as I know, there is no minimally invasive orthopedics related or hard tissue related robot for this task. The other important things, milestone, is surgical autonomy. Basically, surgical autonomy means that can we perform part of the surgery, or like ideally, this looks like sci-fi, I know, but the whole surgery using the robot, and then the robot like autonomously decides and process at each time to do basically the surgery all by itself. So actually surgical autonomy is not a new topic. You see in this picture, by 1992, there was a robot developed. The name of the robot was RobotDoc for basically orthopedic surgery. And here is, in this picture, it's a total knee surgery. What it's doing actually is pretty much is like machining. Most of you have seen the lace or basically some sort of CNC or something. This robot pretty much was like that machining basically tools back in 1990, because when you have a rigid link robot acting on a hard tissue like the bone that you know that it doesn't deform, it's pretty much like machining a piece of wood or metal. You can do some sort of CT scan or take some like pre-op imaging information and then plan it, and then command the robot to do and cut the bone or do some specific thing. But what's happening here, surgical autonomy for hard tissue is very easy, but super difficult for dealing with soft tissue related interventions because of the deformability of that. So in total, what we can do, if we say that this is the scope or space of the whole basically surgeries available to basically performed on a patient, from the hard tissue related on soft tissue related surgery. And if we have the x-axis to the dexterity and y-axis to the autonomy by the basically definition that I had, we can divide it to 4 quadrants. Soft tissue related surgeries are easy to do in terms of the basically dexterity. Not easy, but there are a lot of technologies already developed and many people are working on that, but they are poor in terms of autonomy because of deformability. On the other hand, hard tissue related surgery, in terms of autonomy, it's by far easier, but in terms of dexterity, it's much harder because you are going to use a soft robot or instrument on a hard tissue. The failure and breaking might happen. So what we are doing in my lab, we try to actually, with innovative design and algorithm and technologies, to move these space of surgeries into this quadrant on top right. Basically having high autonomy and high dexterity instruments and algorithms. With this, I know that this introduction was long, but I think it helps you to better understand the first and second part of my talk. In the first part, I want to talk about the technologies we developed to improve dexterity for orthopedics and neurosurgery. So some background you can see in this picture. Actually on top, we had some sort of Roman surgical tool set for performing orthopedic surgery, and at the bottom there is a comparison what we do as of now in the OR using these tools. Pretty much the same. You see, I don't see that much of change actually through this time, and indeed actually I like this one more because it has like some artistic design within that. So another picture I show always to my students and where I give a talk, comparison between orthopedic surgery in an OR and carpentry. You can find like almost all of the tools on the left side and right side. The only difference is that these are sterilized and then a little bit more fancy, of course, biocompatible once you are using it in the OR rather than some sort of like carpentry application. So this means that actually there is a big need for developing new technologies for flexible access surgery or deformable tools to improve what is necessary for surgeons in the orthopedics and neurosurgery. Like we have more than 6.6 million interventions or basically orthopedic surgery by 2022. I think by the time it's even more than that, but almost all of them are using rigid tools. Even robotic technologies, 2 of them are here, they are using rigid instruments. They are just minor computer assisted surgical technologies that trying to improve this basically surgeries. But the main challenge here, as I said, is if you want to define or design a deformable instrument for a robot or medical implant acting on a hard tissue, it's very challenging because it's deformable hard tissue. They may break and it might not work. So with continuum manipulators, as I described them, I want to show you 2 main famous basically continuum robots. One of them is concentric tube robots. As you see here, a bunch of curved tubes. This is designed again for soft tissue related application. This is another version of that version of robots, which is, we call it multi-backbone continuum robot. These 2 are basically the most famous continuum or flexible robots in surgical robotics. But again, these are mainly formulated and designed for soft tissue related surgeries. What are the challenges actually? Since these tools are deforming and they are very small, we are talking about this one is between 1 millimeter to 3 millimeter, and this is max would be 6-7 millimeters. So by these robots, we are talking about a very small robot that needs like very precise fabrication. And also what is important for them, once you have a deformable tool into the body, you need to make sure that you can sense them. You need to be able to observe where they are going, how they deform, because if they deform in a way that you don't like, once you're, for instance, moving into the toward the heart to do some surgery on that, you want to make sure that you know where they are going. So with that, also stiffness of these structures are very important. How stiff they are. If they are very flexible, they are not doing what you are intended to do. Or another issue that they have, they cannot carry a lot of load because their body is flexible. So all of these challenges are very important once we are designing such robots. So what I did mainly during my PhD, that was my PhD work, what we were trying to do, we were trying to develop a robot-assisted surgical system that can perform some orthopedic surgery and improve some basically some orthopedic application. I'm going to talk about it in the next slide. So you will see different components of this robot. There was a robotic manipulator here, a new continuum robot that we developed here. You see it's a tube with some notch. I'm going to talk about it. Some very tiny sensors, about 100 micron diameter, that can go through this robot and then observe the shape of the robot on the go. Flexible tools and instruments complementary for our robot to perform the task, and of course some actuation unit for controlling these robots. So the first application of this surgical system that we worked on was basically on osteolysis or bone degradation for the hip. So what happens actually for total hip application, if patients go to the doctor and says if something happens, if they decide to use these implants, what happens after some time? This is basically a hip implant. In that surgery, they cut the top part of the femoral head. They use the implant here, this cup or acetabular, and then an implant that goes through the basically screwed to on the top part of the femur. But what happened actually, this was with the old generation of this basically acetabular component. Because of the materials behind this cup wasn't ideal, after some time, this material caused the bone to degrade behind the basically cup. And then what had happened is that these screws that are basically holding the cup to the bone is going to start to move or loosen, and you know what's going to happen. The patient is moving and suddenly this joint might move, and then catastrophic things might happen. It's very painful. And after this basically incident, they need to do a revision surgery. But what's happening actually, this revision is very hard because after the time, the cup is fused to the bone, so it's super hard to take it out and then do an implant another cup. What they do instead, they try to take out these screws, go through the screw hole, try to remove this lesion with rigid tools, cure it as much as possible, like this animation, and then fill it with bone cement and try to fix the cup with the bone again, and then recover the patient. But as you see in this picture, it's very hard since you are using the rigid tools inside the hole. And if you are going to reach the cavity behind, because of the rigidity of the tool, it's super hard to be able to remove the whole lesion and then basically perform a complete surgery. Instead, what we suggested, we said, what if we develop this continuum robot or flexible robot made of nitinol tubes? If you are familiar with nitinol, it's a super elastic, basically shape memory alloy that has, you can bend it without breaking it up to 10% of the strength. Basically, in other words, you can bend it up to some basically amount of deformation. It doesn't break, as opposed to using like a stainless steel or other biocompatible materials. So this robot, the total diameter was 6 millimeter, 35 millimeter in length, and then it had a 4 millimeter inner channel for passing different tools in it. This was a cable-driven robot. You see there are holes here. If you pass a cable, fix that at the tip, and if you pull the cable, you are able to control the deformation of the robot. Also, you see we have very tiny 500 micron holes here. These are going to be used. We designed it for passing very tiny optical shape sensors to measure the deformation of the robot within the basically application. With this one, basically my colleague, my lab mate, showed that we can cover up to 94% of the lesion rather than using basically rigid instrument that can at best cover about 50% of the lesion. So you see its performance, and then after pulling the cables, how they can bend and how we can basically reach to different part of the body. And if there is a tool here, you can go there, and then I'll show you in this slide actually how we can basically, by controlling different type of tools, as you see here, very tiny tools, milling and then cutting tools, cut the bone and reach to the basically places that we want. This basically what it shows, this slide, is that for the first time we showed that actually we can introduce the concept of basically flexible milling or flexible cutting or flexible drilling even, because as I said, so far all the cutting tools, all the machining tools, you need to have a rigid instrument to transfer the torque or power from the motor to the tip of your instrument and be able to cut the bone or hard tissue. And if you have a flexible structure, it would be very hard to transfer that force or power to the tip and do the surgery. But indeed, here we are showing actually we were able to perform different types of surgeries on different type of experiments on soft tissue and hard tissue to do this task. Here is basically the general structure of this. Basically, I think I need to remove it because I don't have animation. So this was the general structure of the robot. We had a robotic manipulator, and we had our flexible, tiny continuum robots attached to it. We had passing these instruments, drilling instruments through this robot while using optical fibers through this robot and measuring the tip of our robot to cut this simulated bone material. So everything was autonomous. Basically, we had defined some arbitrary trajectory on this simulated bone material, commanding the robot to go there, follow that green trajectory you see here, and these are the desired points, and try to cut the hard tissue, all autonomously by the robot. Another application that we use this robot was for core decompression of femoral head osteonecrosis. What is core decompression? As you see in this MRI picture, the right side and left side of these femoral head, you see this is the healthy femoral head, and this is basically osteonecrosis femoral head. You see, because of osteonecrosis, what is happening, necrosis of the lesion happens, and what's necrosis is that blood supply to the bone is going to be lost, and if blood doesn't go to feed the cells into the bone, they are going to die after time. So what happens on the left, you see this surgery. What they do, surgeons, they try to use rigid instruments and drills, try to go and reach, make multiple holes or one holes through the lesion, and try to basically recirculate the blood flow in order to improve, and then in order to make the cells start to growing and then rehealing the bone. But what's happening here, they are using a rigid tool. If you are using a rigid tool, and if you're just going to go through a straight trajectories, you never can easily go and achieve these, basically the whole target anatomy. This company, for instance, has tried to make this new tool that gets in and tries to expand and cut, but you can see in this approach, you're compromising both the soft tissue, those healthy and bad part of the bone. Instead, we introduced for the first time this concept of curved drilling using our continuum robot. We said typical drilling is straight. What if we can use our continuum robot, change the type of the flexible tools that we are using, or rigid tools or rigid drill bits, and make it flexible drill as a flexible drill bit, and then if we can rotate it, then we can steer or navigate to the target lesions of interest, and then just treat the part of the bone which is has necroted. So we did this, and then we tried it with different experiments. This is actually the robot going to cutting in curved trajectories these hard tissue simulated bone in basically different angles. What you see here, we tried it. This is basically back in my PhD. I'm going to show you a new version that we have built to as well recently. So different angles, even like tiniest shapes, and even like basically a very minimally invasive like approach that you go through one hole and then make different branch to minimize the basically damage. We also did this for the inside the human cadaveric femur with our robot. This is the same robotic arm. This is the same basically instrument, continuum robot. And then here you see we go through the femur. We can go in and then curve in and achieve to the target trajectories. And then this video is showing actually the whole process. How does it work under the X-ray guidance? So this was mainly back in my PhD. When we started my job, I wrote a grant and said, What if we use the same curve drilling technology for treatment of osteoporosis, specifically for spine, basically column? See here for osteoporosis, as you know, this is like a common problem. Like it's like basically everywhere. It's like from the monetary actually aspect of that is like huge. The cost burden of that $97 billion, like $57 billion. This is just showing that how important is that problem. And as you know, it's just related to the bone mineral density, which is degraded over time. How they treat it, this is like literally any surgery into the spine. The surgeons, they are using some implants which they call it pedicle screws, or we call it rigid pedicle screws. Basically you have two vertebrae. What you're going to do to bypass them for different type of surgery, you just basically use these screws and some rods to connect them with respect to each other and make sure that they are not moving with respect to the other side of the other vertebra in the spinal column, in order to reduce the pain for the patients and then facilitate basically bone fixation. But again, we are coming back to that issue that everything is used with the rigid implants and straight trajectories. And you can imagine our basically hypothesis here was that let's assume that this bone is basically osteoporotic. In this picture, we are showing actually here and here, these are showing osteoporotic part of the vertebra, and then the dense part is basically healthy bone. So let's assume this part is osteoporosis. If you only have one trajectory to getting, no matter what, you are going to implant your screw to the basically osteoporotic region. And what happens, there are a lot of papers saying if you are implanting through an osteoporotic part of the bone, no matter what, loosening of the screw and pull out is going to happen, which is meaning that the patient needs to undergo another surgery. To mitigate that, there are like various versions of the screws that like available to the market, but still, because of their rigidity, they are not solving anything. But what we said, what if again we basically go and use our steerable drilling robot or curve drilling robot and do some sort of biomechanical analysis, takes a QCT scan, say, I know which part of the vertebra has denser region. And then if I can, instead of using the straight drills, using a steerable drilling tool and follow the curve trajectory, maybe I can develop also some sort of flexible implants that I can implant it on the denser part of the bone to improve basically the performance of this fixation. So again, the features, we can implant it in the highest part of the highest density part of the bone. And to do that, what we are developing, we develop a next generation, basically steerable drilling robot. If you compare it with the other design, there is no notch pattern or cut sections along the geometry. Indeed, they are made of, again, nitinol tubes. These are pre-shaped. We call it pre-shaped heat-treated nitinol tubes that guiding some sort of flexible stem or drill similar to what I showed you over there. And what we are saying that if we know what's the trajectory, we can pre-design or pre-program these basically curvatures to our steerable drill, and we can exactly go to the target anatomy that of interest. You can see here we have two different trajectories. For instance, if we want to reach to this point or we want to implant a screw in this curved trajectory, we can go ahead and then design and drill it perfectly as we want. You see here, let me show you this first. This is one of our latest or recent results. We have developed that technology, and which is going through the basically saw bone through the curved trajectory. Since we couldn't see through the bone, what we did, we used the basically thermal camera. We know that during drilling, we are generating like heat, which is indeed is not good for the bone, but we took advantage of that to use our thermal camera and follow the curved trajectory of our drill. So for the sake of time, I just pass this forward. You see our drill goes through this curved trajectory, and this hottest spot here showing actually what's the curvature that we went through. Here are different cross section cut after drilling, you see we underwent different curvatures. We showed that we can go actually in a very fast and time, like which is comparable to what surgeons are doing with a rigid drill in different curvatures. And indeed, you see here the entry point was here, the exit point was about the 90 degree on the other plane. So this video actually we did through one hole, we went through these different curvatures on the left, right, and top, and we are showing with a tiny endoscope actually what are the shape of these holes look like once we are getting in. And basically we are showing here also we casted. We wanted to show what are these curvatures, the holes look like. We pour actually the plaster into these holes. We casted that basically these holes, and then these are indeed showing the geometry of the holes drilled using our instrument. We also did this with our X-ray machine under X-ray, and then showed that actually, unfortunately, I think I don't have the video here, that we can actually drill through the curved trajectory on the animal bone. So these are basically beef bone that we drilled, and we could drill actually, we showed that we can drill actually in curved trajectories. So far I've talked about like a technology that instead of just going straight to the bone, we can go through the curve. But one might come in and say, okay, you have made a hole into the bone. What we need to have a complementary implant that can follow that curve trajectory. See, these are typical bone screws, cancellous bone screws, or basically cortical bone screws. You can see here, they are rigid. So all of the current basically screws that is available to the market, all of them are rigid because there is no other instrument to make curved trajectories. Here what we are saying, and actually this rigidity creates a lot of issues for the surgeons, specifically for complex anatomies like pelvis and vertebra, that you have a lot of nerves and the anatomy has a lot of curvature. So you cannot basically control this curvature. And you will see here, you can see this basically image here that the surgeon tried to put like this very long, these screws are super long, some of them are about more than 10 centimeters, to put into the body. And it takes either of these to implant them into the body. A surgeon needs more than like 50 or 60 X-ray shots, and putting them into the body, either of them might take up to 5 to 10 minutes, even more than that. So we said, what if we can develop a screw that can bend rather than basically being rigid and follow the already curved trajectory that we have basically made into the bone. So this is like the screw, very first generation of our flexible screw that I made back in my PhD, and we are making new generations of that actually in my lab right now for like a spinal fixation. You see here these X-ray shots show that how you can, if you have a curved trajectory, they can morph inside and then follow the trajectories that already drilled using our robot. So we did finite element analysis to show that indeed these actually screws can work. And then this video I'm showing actually how flexible they are, and then what's their geometry look like. We did finite element analysis to show actually most of the time, actually, the first question might come, these are flexible. They cannot carry the load. But we are showing actually using a rigid screw or flexible screw that we developed, the performance actually indeed are not that bad. They are working at the same level of the rigid screws while we are not compromising basically the healthy part of the bone while implanting our screw inside. So let me I think pass this and then talk a little bit about autonomy. I don't want to just talk about I just talk. If you had questions, I want to just have some times for that. So very, very brief, because this is interesting. You might like it. Let me just briefly talk about optical shape sensing, and then I'll go quickly talk about to surgical autonomy. So optical basically fibers or fiber Bragg grating shape sensing is relatively new cutting edge technology for medical industry. Why this is nice? Because we are talking about a sensing assembly which is less than 500 micron. The optical fiber itself is less than 100 micron. So these sensors that we developed for our continuum robot, you see here we had two holes, we can put them, implant them inside the robot. And what they do for us with this very tiny form factor, they can give us simultaneous shape and force measurement. In this slide you see here, and they are super sensitive. We are using a feather to touch a needle which embedded with these sensors, and you see here it can measure very tiny forces. That this sensor has been developed actually for eye surgery. Once you get into the eye and you want to penetrate different layers of eye, you want to measure the force. Also here we are showing actually with this sensor how we can basically get the shape of our flexible robot, which I told you is critical once we are dealing with a basically continuum robot. What we did here, we basically they have their own issues from the fabrication, from the getting the data. Optical basically fibers have their own issues, but we have developed some techniques and algorithms that can improve their basically their performance, and then indeed improving the accuracy of their measurements. So I want to pass this modeling's works, which might be that interesting as autonomy. So with this, I want to briefly talk about the second part of the introduction that I told. You remember I said dexterity is necessary for orthopedics?
I didn't get that. Could you try?
But what is also missing is autonomy in surgery, but autonomy mostly for soft tissue related interventions. So what's the motivation? So most of you have heard about autonomous cars, Tesla robots, but if you see this actually a spectrum started from these very, very old cars, like in the very first days of their inventions, up to some sort of assisted intelligence. So most of you might have in your car, like basically some modules in your car that can help you for while you are parking your basically car. And then the next level of autonomy that like Tesla is talking about is fully autonomous cars, that you have a car into the street, and then basically there are other cars, and then the car can decide where to pass the other cars and how to ensure safety of the passengers and then the driver while autonomously moving into the streets. The same, if you can compare it with the surgery or surgical technologies, you can compare either of these developments and basically columns with respect to each other. With surgery, you can compare laparoscopic surgery with very first generations of the cars, and then intuitive surgical like teleoperation or telesurgery compared with this level of like autonomy or work like assistance into the surgery. And finally, what you are thinking actually for the surgeons is developing for them robotic basically surgery modules, which like pilots, they can sit behind the console and just command as a supervisory, has a supervisory role, and command the robot to perform a task for them. So coming back to the plot that we had, I told you in terms of the hard tissue related surgery, it's easy in terms of autonomy because it's like typical machining. You can pre-plan, command the robot to cut, but once you're dealing with a robotic surgery, this is performed by Da Vinci on a deformable tissue, you see super hard. As soon as you touch a deformable tissue, it might deform in a way that you never can predict. So that's the reason we put in terms of dexterity, soft tissue related surgeries in this quadrant. So since predicting deformation of a deformable tissue, tracking deformation of tissue is super hard and needs a lot of calculations and algorithms. So it's very challenging as compared to hard tissue to develop like basically autonomous basically platforms for performing a surgery. And the key step toward basically surgical autonomy is somehow understanding the deformation of a soft tissue or deformable tissue while during the manipulation interventions. There are, like, if you check the literature, different ways: analytical approach, mechanics-based approach. deep learning, machine learning approaches, and then like a lot of them, but all of them have their own issues. But what we are suggesting actually here, let me skip these and show you this thing, is basically we develop techniques that saying that if I don't have any prior knowledge on the deformation of an object, as you see here, this is a super like a stochastic, like deformable object that we made to show that actually whether we can predict the formation and perform the task. What is the task here? You see green dots and red dots here. The task is to overlay the green points to the fixed red points. And you see here, this was my lab mate trying to see under the camera, overlay them together and then compare. This is the algorithm that we did, that autonomously, without any help, try to learn the deformation, try to accomplish the task. Actually, you see here, what is very challenging, as soon as you move the tissue, the balls and inside that basically balloon is moving, and making the deformation is very challenging. But you will see robot, like a human, what it does, tries to poke it in different direction, learn the deformation, and then try to accomplish the task. So with this technique and with the Da Vinci robot, like the research version of that we have in my lab back in Hopkins, we develop different we develop techniques and perform different surgeries that I want to show you like in next slide very briefly, how we could basically understand the deformation on the fly and perform the task as I mentioned. In the next slides, what we are doing actually, we have a green dot and try to basically push it on the on the red dot while we don't know the deformation of basically the tools and then also the objects that we had here. So one of them, in one of the works that we had, we made these two phantoms. We wanted to make it like very deformable, unpredictable deformation. So we fill these balloons partially with these beans and then balls, and basically ask the robot to move these green points to the red points. So you see here, these are some plots showing the intelligence and then how the robot learns. But you see the way the robot works, just to move in different directions and tries to basically understand the deformation and then perform the task toward the goal. And you see, as soon as the robot moves, the balls are moving, making the prediction very hard, but it's able to do it. Made it even harder during manipulation. We wanted to cut, simulating like the debridement or cutting off the tissue during the task, but we showed that it's doable. We use the same technique to show that we can do needle insertion through using the surgery. So needle insertion is a critical actually task through various surgical intervention in which a surgeon, in order to deliver some sort of to have a biopsy needle, perform a biopsy or ablation, putting it into the tissue. But again, what's happening? Needle is deforming, tissue is deforming, and the robot, what we are doing here, we manipulate the tissue to go to the target that we want, and then command the robot to do the task. We also did some sort of ex vivo tissues to show that actually is working on a real animal tissue. This video is better. Let me skip that one. In this case, we have this green dot and red dot, and we try to, once the robot overlay these two together, we try to disturb it by using, basically I was trying to disturb it and then try to oppose in the other direction, but the robot could basically learn and then do the task intelligently. All right, sorry I talked a lot. This slide, I just wanted to summarize what we talked about, autonomy and dexterity here. And then we developed different technologies to show that actually how we can improve flexibility of the hardware and develop algorithms and techniques to basically have a better autonomous and intelligent surgical intervention with new flexible instruments. And coming back as a concluding remark, we need surgery engineering to design tools for the clinicians, but with them, rather than typical approach, which is just design engineering and clinicians working like separately. Acknowledgements to all my PIs, like in Hopkins, and then the collaborators, of course, the NIH for supporting my PhD. Acknowledgement to my basically team, my students in UT, and then of course the NIH and IBIB for providing grants. And our clinicians, Dr. Amadio, is a neurosurgeon, helped us with the basically development of the tools I showed you. Also, I acknowledge Dr. Ikoma. We have another project, cancer project. He's our collaborator, basically helping us. And then thanks to you for your attention. Sorry again for the slides. I couldn't show the animation. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much, Dr. Alambeigi, for your very nice and inspiring presentation. I really enjoyed it, and I have many questions. Although I think we have only 15 minutes to go over the questions. But before we go to the Q&A session, which I highly recommend the participants to ask their questions using the Ask a Question box, I'd like to announce that our next speaker is Dr. Jenny Chen, founder and CEO of 3D Hills. She is going to talk about 3D printing and the role of 3D printing in the future of medicine next week. So please follow us on Twitter with our handle TransLBME, and also Human and I on LinkedIn to get most up-to-date information about the next presentation. So with that, I'd like to start with a question from the audience, and that's Milad, who is asking about the flexibility of the screws that sometimes surgeons are using for during surgeries. Do you also work on the level of flexibility for the flexible screws? Sometimes you may need a firm screws, but sometimes you need the screws to be flexible. And then the next question is, do you change the cut shape or gap in their geometry or change the material? So mainly the material for the screws.
Very, very good question. So for the flexible screws, actually, we have developed, we didn't have time to show you. But yes, indeed, there are parameters once you're designing your flexible screw, including the material, which is defining modulus of elasticity, and then basically the nature of the design of the notches or patterns that we have. That if you play with them, you can actually control the stiffness. You can make them, as Milad, I guess, mentioned, make them more flexible or more like a strong if necessary, depending on the quality of the bone and depending on the other aspects. Indeed, we are developing a biomechanical module that before building the basically screws tells us what should be that stiffness, what should be the curvature and everything is driven by the QCT scan that we are taking from the patient. If the patient needs, the patient's basically bone is more osteoporotic, we want to make sure that we are not making it very stiff to deal with the same issues of loosening and then pull out. Yes, short answer is yes, you can control the parameters.
Sorry, I'm muted. Awesome. Yeah. Thank you. So let me just ask you a question. Did you use mind beams to make these like the soft tissues?
Yeah. Exactly. So always I tell my students, yes, you don't need to be fancy in terms of making phantoms. Just look around like balloons, and then we just got these beans to make them because they were heavy. I was looking for something very tiny, a little bit heavy, more dense. Yeah. So I said, okay, I have something in my kitchen.
But that's the shape, because these are pretty round, and I get into my material science. I'm wearing that hat, and it's like they are pretty round shaped kind of particles. So do you see the shape has any effect? So, for example, if you used rice, would that affect your, the results that you get? Because the reason I'm asking that is because some of the tissues have these anisotropic, mechanical properties that changes along one direction and then it doesn't change in the other direction. So I wanted to hear your thoughts on that.
Yeah, very good point. So my point over there was, and if you realize we partially filled it to have the whatever that you like, exactly what you mentioned, like anisotropic basically performance or mechanical property. But you are right. If you change it to rice, obviously the interaction between these particles would be different, and you will get a very, very different basically performance. Yeah, next experiment we are going to use rice. And then we'll acknowledge you in the paper.
That's okay. But the next question I have is about, again, the mechanical properties of tissues, and whether, and again, that might be a very naive question, and
No
but
question is naive.
most most tissues, they have viscoelastic properties, so they are, some sort of, they either are shear thinning or shear thickening, depending on where the organ is. Have you had any research or any thoughts on whether these properties can affect the
Exactly.
performance?
So definitely, yeah, that's another nice question. That's the reason we did like that ex vivo experiment. You
Oh, yeah.
realized actually, yeah. So, and as you know, once depending on the speed of the manipulation or the way you manipulate, because of this viscoelasticity, you get different performance, which adds to the level of difficulty that we cannot use a model-based method for modeling that deformation. We need to use another techniques. And yeah, that's a very, very valid actually concern and point.
So along the same direction, then my next question would be about now organs or tissues that are moving in the body. So that adds another level of difficulty. So I wanted to hear your thoughts on that, especially when you go into, maybe you want to do heart surgery, then there's like this pumping movement that you see in the body, in the heart, and then how do you plan to address that challenge?
So very, very good question. This is coming actually to the imaging part of our techniques, right? Here you see we said that we have a laparoscope or camera feed that can, and then we had some markers like that green and red dot, that we had physical markers that we can track. So this is coming back the way that, or what technology we are going to use to quickly observe that deformation of the heart, which is super challenging, right? Yeah. Because if you use like a camera feed, let's say I want to do a laparoscopic basically surgery on a heart, right? You want to make sure that with that camera, we can follow, let's say I want to do like cut part of the heart or put a valve over there. What we need to do, we need to either mechanically somehow stabilize locally the motion of the heart in a way that we can do the work that we want to do, or we need to somehow compensate it with like a high frequency of our imaging, like either with a camera, or there are other actually technologies. I don't know if it's usable for heart or not, that basically these are UV glues, UV basically that markers that you can just put on the surface of the heart, biocompatible, and under UV light you can track them. So basically you can have a bunch of these markers and pretty much follow the same technique that we use. But what I really like, and I think there are companies working on it, there are like point cloud cameras, very high frequency point cloud cameras that can in real time. This is a very, very new actually technology. These are laser scanners that you can scan with a bunch of basically point clouds, the deformation, very quickly the deformation of the heart, and then you can use it for different applications. Let's say you want to basically measure the deformation for any reason, or you want to just go and locally, for instance, for your case, print something on the surface of the heart or do something with that. So you need that deformation imaging technique.
I see. And those cameras, are they connected? Are they externally located or positioned to image, or they're like going through like fiber optics? And
so very good question. This is actually super new technique that I started talking about, the startup. So they are making for now a very good question. So it's just externally they are developing for like external cameras. What I talked to the guy, he said that it's possible. There is nothing out there, as you are saying, something like this that has a low form factor, and you can put into the body like a laparoscope to do measurement. As of now, as you know, we just have MR, CT, like the ultrasound, or like just a laparoscope to do this type of things.
But there should so they don't cut the chest open. Like they don't. It's like minimally invasive.
Yeah, if they are going to cut the chest open, yeah, that's
there's no point.
Yeah,
Really
that's the point then. Yeah, exactly.
So my next question is about drilling through the bones, and then I'm asking this because long time ago I had a colleague who was working on using these smart drills that for dental applications, and then one of the challenges they had was that the bone itself it has different porosities and different mechanical properties, and then therefore you have to adjust the drilling speed, so that when you go into a softer parts of the bone, then you definitely need to use a lower speed and then faster when it's harder. So do you have that kind of sensing mechanism in your system, or are you planning to include these sensing mechanisms in your flexible drilling technology? And if you think, if your answer is yes, what kind of sensor are you thinking about including?
So again, very, very good question. I answer it in two ways. So first of all, yes. So if you have cortical bone, cancellous bone, and I showed also depending on the bone mineral density, if it's osteoporotic or not. So you need to adjust either your drilling tool, the geometry of the drill bit, let's say, or the speed of cutting. And this needs to be adjusted based on either of the levels. For my work, what we do, we take the CT scan, but it's a quantitative CT scan. With quantitative CT scan, you can map and measure the bone mineral density in 3D. So we know and we can plan. We know what are the densities in 3D, and we can plan. But if you don't have that, what we can do also, I showed you that optical fiber sensor. That's a very nice sensor. And with that sensor, we have done actually some experiments that you can measure the vibration and forces during cutting. So it's obvious if you are cutting a hard part of the bone, so you deal with more vibration. So if you can measure forces and vibration, you can adjust your control speed or cutting speed, or if it's easier, you can just adjust. So we have embedded sensors in our basically device. We have intraoperatively, we can use the C-arm or X-ray machine that we had, and then we can use pre-op QCT because you know that the bone is not going to change. So you can plan for that. Yeah.
That's excellent. And then along the same direction, so now that because these rigid drills, when I use them, I like at home, I see that there's like a lot of vibration. I'm feeling them. So but these vibrations, when they are transferred to the soft body of these flexible basically catheters or like guidance, would they have any effect on the performance of these soft robotic
Yep,
tips?
that's another. Yeah, of course. Yeah, because it's like a deformable thing, as I said, deformable structure. Of course, once you're dealing with the hard tissue, vibrations comes, it might break it. And you see that we had the previous generation that I work in my PhD, it was very flexible. We had notches. That's the reason we switched to the new design. So the new design that we have, we are showing actually these are not as vulnerable as the other version. And then the effect of vibration breaking actually is not serious in this design because of the structure. And yes, and we changed the structure because of the thing that you mentioned. Yeah, with the design, you can actually somehow address those issues.
So, by design, you mean the shape, and then the
design
shape
of the geometry of the
geometry
like steerable, material and everything.
Yep. Okay, that's perfect. So I have well, thank you, Farshid. Again, I mean, this is a very, very interesting topic, and we've been talking about this for a long time with my colleagues, and so I don't have more questions, but I'll let Human ask his questions if he has any.
No, I just want to thank you. Covered my question as well about the heart, because I'm working on the heart. Mohsen, can you hear me? No, I don't.
Yes, I can hear you.
Oh, okay. So that's great, and I really want to thank Professor Alambeigi today for his great talk, and just to let the audience know that the talk is recorded. And sorry for the technical issues that we had in terms of going to the presentation mode. But anyhow, I mean, the science is important, and we saw the slide, and we really enjoyed and learned a lot. Thank you so much. Mohsen, if you want to wrap up and close the session.
Sure. Well, thank you. Thanks, Human. And again, thanks, Dr. Alambeigi, for accepting our invitation. I'd like to also thank the participants for attending this talk. We will have our next speaker next Wednesday, Dr. Chen, who will be talking about 3D printing and its applications in medicine. Have a good day, everyone, and see you next week.
Thank you. Have a good
See
day.
you.
Bye.
Thank you so much. Have a good day. Bye-bye.